Hi everybody and welcome back to B2B NAV. Back to our normal marketing communications topics this week rather than being defrauded out of cash. So this week we have set what is quite a lengthy title, so I'm going to read it out, but very relevant to a lot of the multinational and large-scale clients that we work with. So the question we are going to discuss is, how do you create a coherent brand experience across multiple diverse business units, all with their own agenda? Now, there's a perfect person here to answer that question, Mr. John Hallowell, Creative Director.
How do you do that? I think you've got to understand, look, we don't live in a perfect world, and I think everyone knows the perfect theory for doing it. I do. You read about it in books, and that's it. You start with the parent organisation, and you do a full rebrand exercise around that. You look at what they need to achieve, what they need to articulate, and how that then filters down into all their little divisions.
And things like that, at that level, are we talking mission, values,
vision, values, proposition, value propositions.
All at a corporate level at that point.
Yeah, and you're at a corporate level looking at the mothership.
Yep.
But the world's not perfect, is it?
Yep.
And I think therein lies the rub. So what you need to do is at least, or certainly what we try and do, I think, is take a flavour, at the very least, of the corporate entity and then articulate that through. Now, whether we're carrying a strap line through a line that we've heard or we've articulated in a meeting, it depends. But it's always, you've got to kind of come back to something. And I think that's where the big struggles lie. And the problem, I guess, first off, is identifying why people are veering off. What's the causation of that thing? Because theoretically they shouldn't feel they need to or want to. Is it, and we can wax lyrical more about this, is it the fact that they've given themselves access to social channels? Is it the fact that they've discovered the web? Is it the fact, and in some cases it is, that the mothership isn't cutting it or is paralysed by an elephant in front of them that they don't know where to start chewing away at it?
The difficulty sometimes, I guess, must lie in the fact when we talk about the different diverse business units, business groups, whatever reference you want to make to them, but in the large businesses that we're working with, the sectors that they operate in are genuinely so diverse.
And I think that's probably the key. So some of our clients are quite, while they've got many business groups, they all sit around one area. So it might be science, it might be pharma, it might be nutrition, but fundamentally, the core of the business is true across all the business units. It might be different markets, it might be different geographies that are serving. When you get one that is truly diverse, you then do have a problem of how can one brand entity answer all these wants and needs, whether, I don't know, if you're going automotive one day, electronics the next day, personal care the next. It's really hard to find commonality between those three, and that's only three.
But and at that point, I guess, let's crack on through the different topics there, because I guess I'm conscious of some listeners will have a great knowledge on this topic and others will be a lot more basic, I guess. But in the real world application of this, so as I just said there, John, in an ideal scenario, you'd want to set the tone at the top. That would include what, brand guidelines, I'm assuming?
Brand guidelines, corporate identity,
tone of voice,
vision, mission, values, tone of voice. You name it, absolutely everything. But the ideal is that you're doing that with a business that's got all these kind of divisions underneath it in place. So you can sit there as a mother, I don't know, we'll use these. So imagine that the pint of water, the Coke, and you're drinking Moretti today.
It would appear to be.
Are all existing business units, and the phone is the mothership, the brand entity. So you start talking about the brand entity, but you've got all these in place, so you kind of see what you're dealing with. But in reality, what you find is this exists over here initially, and it's
this being the mothership for anybody that can't see us.
The lead entity, that's kind of doing its own thing, and then that over time buys that, merges or buys that. Buys the pint of water, buys the coffee cup, buys the laptop, and it becomes this kind of unwieldy beast. And how could you possibly, how can its values possibly align unless there's been a very clear, purposeful purchase strategy
But I think that's it. I think the best practice argument around the brand proposition and points sit very well in like a startup mentality. So if it's a brand new business, when you're doing everything with a clean sheet of paper, that's perfect. When you are M&A'ing and acquiring companies and integrating businesses and business units, it's absolute nightmare. Particularly, Ollie, I guess, if they've got they've already their own brand presence, profile, social media footprint.
So we're seeing that with one of our new clients now, is that they've effectively got, I think it's 40 or 50 different social profiles in play across multiple different business units, like in this case, again, like they've acquired over time. Different regions have their own accounts and things like that, and it's just they've had to start dialing it back and start shutting down accounts because they've not been kept up consistently. There's not regular posting. There's not the right tone of voice there across all the accounts.
Are there
even social media guidelines in place on that type of thing? Probably not.
No, in this case, no. So that's what we're doing now with them is
or there would be across 9, 10, 20 different business
So in that
groups.
case, it's a case of going back retrospectively and trying to then apply it. But obviously that's, in an ideal world, you would like to do this before you get into things. Like you're saying with the startup, it's very easy to define all these things at the very beginning. Much harder, obviously, if you've done all this M&A and you're a bigger company, you will end up in a situation at some point where you've got different business units or different brands or different regions that end up somewhat misaligned in that kind of brand experience.
And I think one of the other frustrations, obviously, is we're all impatient these days. But if I was the head of a business group or one of the kind of verticals, I guess, from a client perspective, and I had to wait for the corporate level team to tell me what the proposition was going to be and how I could shape my messaging and what content I could produce, would I be happy waiting in that scenario?
I think it's unlikely you would wait, especially with stuff like social media or anything else.
Well, I think
you'll just go out there and do it.
Either decelerate the pipeline or have an effect on sales, you're going to be resistant against.
Well, then how do you control that then?
And
because
I think it's probably worth us.
You're always going to have that rubber going ahead of each other, I guess, in that kind of scenario.
I suppose it's worth as well noting that I think we're talking very much at the moment about a kind of, I guess, not a house of brands. It's not one parent brand with multiple individual product brands underneath it. It's more the idea of an endorsed kind of subdivision, and each of these divisions operates in its own markets, and that's slightly different. So that's probably where.
Is it worth talking through that kind of brand architecture as a top level point? Because I guess you have got second nature to you and us.
And you now.
No, okay, well we do it a lot, don't we? But I mean, more in the sense of, I guess, the options you've got for that kind of brand architecture at a high level. I mean, in the first
it's kind of worth understanding how you want the businesses to sit. So if we use, I don't know, we'll use ourselves as an example. If BDB, we're going to kind of go on the acquisition trail and buy multiple businesses in multiple sectors, we've got lots of choices in front of us in terms of how we portray or divide that portfolio of entities up. And that, I guess, some of it depends on what our long-term vision is. Market equity, existing kind of competitive issues and such like. So we could term it in, if we diversified, I don't know, into a social influencer agency, a digital agency on its own, a business to consumer agency, all these kind of. It might be BDB suffix the division, and that's one way of skinning it, and that's more where the alignment problems that we're discussing arise, because you've kind of got then those very different pulls and needs.
It's almost like endorsed, isn't it, by the parent, I guess, in that case,
Because in that case, the expectation from that customer is that it's BDB, but if we're not all...
It's a flavour of BDB, so what it is that kind of thing of... So if we use our positioning, which is we are B2B, obviously, if we went into the B2C market, it would be quite troublesome for us.
Quite a tough one, that one,
But if we're diversifying our business stream into things like digital exhibitions, influencer, blah, 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 all of those would hark back to that core truth and value of we are B2B. And each of those entities would have a take on it.
What that means to them, I guess.
Exactly, and I think that's probably, without jumping ahead, that's probably one of the ways you can solve these problems. We're lucky we've got a very, very pinpoint, precise proposition. For a lot of organisations, what they've had to do, and you see it all the time, is they've had to kind of dilute to a point where their actual value proposition, strapline, tagline, whatever you want to call it, is kind of meaningless. It's kind of a lot of the words you kind of expect, sometimes in an order you expect, sometimes not. But they're sort of kind of, and they have to be that broad,
Yeah.
because then they have to account for every business underneath it.
So the introduction of social and I guess the digital environment that we now operate in, it has made it easier for people to go off-piste with brand, I guess, and as you said earlier, set up their own channels and run their own shop. And I guess, a real world example that we've come across this week is a client working on a website. So the website needs finishing. Very similar story to ourselves. We're trying to update our new website at the minute and urgently trying to get things done on that. But the client wants to get that finished, wants to get that done. The kind of renewed corporate level top line proposition probably isn't there yet. So the website needs finishing. So the tone of voice for that website needs shaping, the copy for that website, the proposition, which at the moment is at risk of maybe being focused on one of the many stakeholders in the mix for kind of that web environment. How do you advise advise around that, I guess, in the sense of, it's a real world example, the website needs doing. Yeah. This bit isn't done yet. And then there's 10 quite disparate business groups in the mix as well.
That you need to bring on board.
Yeah.
I think it very much depends on, you've got to prioritise. Is your current website in such a poor state and doing such a bad job of communicating to your audience at the minute that you have no choice but to go ahead and replace it right now because you're losing opportunities in the meantime? Or is it a case of your current website is actually a bit dated, but could do with replacing, but the message is the most important thing to get right? If the message is the most important thing, then you'd be better off holding off and trying to align everybody internally, get everything you need from the stakeholders. If it's a case of your website isn't converting when you need it to be, and you're getting traffic to the site, but you're losing business on a day-to-day basis, you can go ahead, you can launch that new website and make sure that you come back to it and align. Don't forget about it and say, we've launched that new website, we're done now, let's touch it again in 3 years' time.
Almost like the
you can change
MVP approach to it, to getting something out there.
Or can you go sort of do in multiple steps? I mean, I think that's an interesting question in terms of, do you think they immediately go, so the website's not performing for whatever reason? We look into it and we go, well, we're getting traffic, but no one's converting. And do you think that immediate thing, because this always goes around my head, the immediate reaction to most people is, it must be the site structure, it must be the UX, it's got to be something around the way you structure it and calls to action. Whereas in fact,
it could be
quite equally be that we're not saying anything, we're not saying things in a articulated way that are meaningful.
I think you have to weigh that up. You have to do best guess as to why that is that people are not converting. And if you've got a dated old site with a bad structure, there's probably a good chance, or it's a slow site, there's a good chance it's that. On the other hand, if your messaging's all over the place and you're not clearly articulating who you are, but the actual user experience of the site isn't bad, then maybe that's the case.
It comes back again to questioning, I guess, the brand architecture as well. And like we said, is it a house of brands? Is it a branded house? Which way do you go? Because we've all seen, I know you and I have looked at sites in the past and just like almost given up, where you look at a site and you know that the site structure is a direct result of the M&A activity.
We
bought that quick, put it on the site. We bought that, we need it on the site without any thought about how the user or the customer or the prospect interacts in that marketplace. And it might be, and this is, I think most large organisations bulk at this, and probably unwisely. It might be that actually what you need to do is actually split these sites out. So a lot of the time we see corporate sites with multiple divisions worth of material on. I can think of clients present and past who are all like this.
Absolutely.
And there's probably quite a loss in traction because they're not specialising, they're not identifying what makes their proposition in that market unique and really honing in on it. They're going best fit for everything. So it's almost like the tail wags the dog of, we need a corporate site. I had a client years ago who had about 4 or 5 divisions, and they handily had their brand name and then suffixed each of the divisions with a phrase.
Okay.
So I said to them one day, I was like sitting with the 3 business unit managers and the chairman, and we were having a really long discussion about who buys from what. And ultimately, they all interestingly said, we just buy from company A's name.
Oh, right, okay.
No suffix, no nothing.
Right. It's almost meaningless in a way.
Almost meaningless. But then they also said, well, no, we don't, not them, because they're the corporate business. That's something different. So you need to kind of work out, how do you balance that
Well, it's understanding the buyer, I suppose, to an extent, understanding the customer journey, understanding, I guess, how they go through it. I guess flipping it a different way, 'cause I'm trying to think of all the different angles you come at this from, because I'm always keen to try and bring it back to real life examples, because obviously theory is great. We always say that theory is fantastic. On a level of, let's assume in a scenario that the top level corporate brand is done, set, lovely, everybody's happy with it. Then you go down to a business group level. So let's take something like advanced materials for something like that we work with across various. And for anybody that doesn't know, that's like coatings, resins, you name it, weird and wonderful things that go. Rubber is another one. But like at that business group level, then, so they've got the corporate brand guidelines. They've got all that. They've then got to work out their own vertical proposition. Correct, yeah. And then in terms of, would the recommendation be that at that level they also have brand guidelines?
I think it depends on, are you sat within a branded house of brands, how autonomous is each of those business units?
Because how do you ensure even something like an exhibition show, as an example, where there's a lot of activity going on, everything from the branding, the collateral, the content on the day, the digital environment that features on the stand, and even things like pieces to camera that people are shooting, the messaging, the way that's shot, the way people look. Is that a business group issue then, or is that a corporate issue, or is that...
This is where it needs to be, and this is the inconvenient truth of it. Each business is totally different.
Yeah.
And each business has its own set of, I guess, issues around the subject.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that they all have to do, everyone has to do, and everyone fails to do, is just put the anchors on, stop. Take time to consider what's right for your marketplace. Yeah. So how much affinity does business unit A that's just been acquired have with the master brand? Does it need to have a slightly more divorced, shall we say, relationship, or does it need to be right in the pocket of that area? You know, is it a product brand? Is it a service brand? Is it a division? All these things kind of have to be considered, and I don't think people necessarily pay enough attention to working that out first. So that's where you do get these problems of, we're doing a stand and we're doing it for one of the business groups, but we're going to be corporate. And in a lot of instances, that's exactly the right thing to do. But equally, you need to sometimes think, is it?
Yeah.
Do we need to be more, is our corporate flavour relevant versus what we know within that business group, or what we kind of want to articulate as a message?
And does that apply through to the web environment as well then, Ollie? I guess if you've got like a parent company corporate site, and then let's say you've got 10 different business groups that are quite disparate, from cosmetics to adhesives to you name it, all the different areas that we work across, I guess, as disparate as they can be. Is that web environment, would the recommendation be, I don't know, it might be, depends on the scenario, but divisions on a site, different sites, microsites?
I think we've seen people approach it different ways, and there's advantages and disadvantages to everything. So I don't want to give a cop-out answer, but it does very much depend on your situation.
I knew that was the answer. I just thought.
But we've seen.
Well, it's not a cop-out. It's the right
We've
answer.
got clients where you go to their corporate site and they've got 20, 30 different subsections for each of the different sectors, and then we've got clients where each of those is on a completely different domain, a different site, and giving a different kind of user experience there as well. So it really depends on how closely aligned everything is, how closely aligned everything is to that parent.
I think
brand.
Depends on the objectives as well, doesn't it? Because of what the website's trying to achieve.
And also, I think to some degree, it doesn't actually matter at all, because what matters is what the market is demanding and how the rest of the market operates.
Yeah.
What are the SEO concerns around that specific market area? What are the wants and needs? What are they asking for?
At the end of the day, as long as users can find what they need,
Yeah.
I don't think they care what domain they're on or whether
I think you're right, but I think we see it a lot that you tend to find when you go to these large corporate behemoths, it's really hard to find what you want, and then when you do find it, it's kind of like a bit of an afterthought.
Yeah.
I think part of the issue there, and this is a completely separate point, is just sometimes with the scale of the sites that they're trying to deal with, they seem to have either failed to approach it right in terms of structuring their site in the first place to make that easy to navigate, or they did that 10 years ago when that was the standard and that was the way people browsed, but such a big site's hard to redo, so you can't redo it as often. and it requires much more stakeholders to get it signed off, which means that your dated site structure and navigation kind of lives on way past its expiration
But
date.
then I look at people who, they don't change their site that often, but they get it right. So the likes of GE, the likes of IBM, Canon, for example, work in a huge range of areas, and they seem to pretty much universally go down the subdomain route in terms of everything starts at their URL, but then they'll always subdomain it out. And is that more, do you think that's a better way to approach it, or? But because they don't seem to change that often, they seem to be able to accommodate.
Do you mean subdomain or subfolder?
IBM.smartplanet.com.
Fair enough. I think the more common one that I see with multinational companies is
//
Yeah, and then having a separate URL within that for each company. So each country, so /.
Just for the non-geeks,
Exactly.
what is it? What's the difference?
A subdomain, let's give an example, would be digital.bdb.co.uk. Don't bother typing in, it doesn't exist. Or you could have bdb.co.uk/digital, which would be a subfolder.
Yeah.
And
that sits on your main domain site.
So it's the difference between a subdomain and a main domain. Main domain usually has more benefits in terms of search engines and traffic finding you.
Yeah.
And that's usually the way companies approach it, especially with regards to multinational sites. Maybe not if you're talking about different things, but if I want to have a French site and a Canadian site and a Canadian French site and a US site, etc., you'll usually find it's following that structure of country and country code.
Yeah. Okay.
But that would typically be for a non-multi-group product service software.
So I guess it'll vary
wouldn't
when somebody's getting involved in different businesses and different sectors, because then you're not sharing the same core message and approach.
Yeah.
Do you think then there has to be an acceptance that things will be out of sync unless you are day zero with a brand new business to an extent?
No, I don't. I was just going to say, actually, I think the answer to it is at some point you need integration, and you need integration that has that helicopter view of multiple business units. So what you can't solve the problem. So to a point, you're never going
to have the perfect moment to do it.
You either go year zero.
Yeah.
We are starting from scratch, but brands tend to only ever do that if there's been a fundamentally quite a large problem of some description.
Yeah.
Or you kind of almost go back up the chain. You go, right, okay, well, if we start looking for the commonalities between all the business groups and the core brand, whether that's a value, whether it's their vision, whether it's their personality, you start to create that familial feel between them. Because I guess that's what everyone wants, is that ability to feel that everything is cohesive and together. Because if it looks like a steptoe's yard, it doesn't really engender confidence, does it?
They definitely all want to feel part of the same family, generally. And I think, coming from the other side of it, in the M&A environment, I think, having seen both sides of it now, quite often the M&A and the statutory kind of structuring of companies sometimes seems to drive it rather than
what's right for the customer,
and what's right for the customer side of things. So the fact you've got a corporate finance, or a tax planner or accountant in the room saying you must structure your businesses in these ways, and these are the corporate structuring, and these are the different brands, and they'll be advising people to think about even the exit planning. So
I was about to say that.
Are you going to sell that in isolation? Is it a group sale? Is it a conglomerate sale? Whatever it may be. That's the kind of advice that is also going on in the background in boardrooms with C-suites, whereas the brand sometimes does feel like an afterthought. Probably.
So that's, I guess, where you want to bring your partner, your agency, your consultancy in, and be as honest as you can with them. If the aspiration is to sell in 5 years or to sell a quarter of the portfolio,
it does slightly alter the agenda, doesn't it?
Give them that information so that they can help you design a brand structure and a brand kind of platform that allows that, rather than pulling everything in dogmatically and calling it one thing or another thing.
You had a question there, right?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, when approaching this, and let's say you've got a company that's misaligned and you've got lots of subdivisions doing their own thing, and you want to try and fix that, and you're starting at that corporate level, you've got buy-in, and you're wanting to correct these issues. To what extent should you or shouldn't you let the divisions have involvement in that project? Should this be something that's dictated down? Should you be getting them involved so they're more bought into it?
I think they need to be involved. If they don't buy into it, it won't happen. It's like anything. It's like negotiating with a 10-year-old. If you, or a 3-year-old in your case, or a 6-year-old in your case,
that's hard enough for me. Yeah.
If you don't get them to buy into what you're saying, they won't do it. Now, I guess in reality, it's more like benign dictatorship, isn't it? There's an element of a kind of, I don't know, psychological profiling here, and almost getting them to think that they're part and it's their idea, but you've got to get that buy-in.
Depends how tight the process is, procedures, the level of autonomy of the individual business groups. Can they go off and do their own thing? And then there's also a logistical aspect, I guess, of the, if you're talking about global businesses, you could have somebody sat in Brazil trying to report or get sign-off from somebody in Europe or even further afield, and you've got the time zones to deal with. So there's an awful lot of practical issues to think about with these things, and I think in terms of should they be involved, I would always say yes. I would always say they should be involved in the process so they get the buy-in, they feel like they've been consulted. However, sometimes somebody's got to drive that process. So if it's so egalitarian that we all have a chat about it, you think one thing and I think the other.
I think it's rather
it's
probably forgiveness, not permission, isn't it? In terms of this is how we are going to approach it. We hope you'd like it. We want to take you through it.
Yeah. And I think that's it for me, yes, so setting that process, explaining the best practice, explaining the way to go and why you would do it in such a way, getting them involved in that process, hopefully getting their buy-in, and then having the control environment, the guidelines, the principles to police that as well off the back of it, because you don't want... It's great doing it, setting it all, and then immediately somebody goes and sets up their own Twitter handle over here somewhere, which immediately is at complete odds with what you spend months planning.
And then you get into like there's some really interesting ways of approaching that, because now you kind of move it on then from the theoretical and the cerebral side of it to, you're right, you've done all that. How the heck do you kind of keep the implementation solid enough? And I guess, we've talked about it before, I'm sure we will again, that's where you need platforms that you can utilise in a way that will give consistent messaging, consistent assets, consistent
and without
experiences.
crippling the agility of the business. I think you see that. I was a fear of mine always, is in terms of like process and procedures can cripple that kind of free thinking, creativity and agility of a business.
Then you pick your model, don't you? So then it moves into a whole different thing of, do we have a lead agency?
Yeah.
Do we have an agency of record? Do we have one agency that does everything? Do we have one agency managing multiple local agencies?
Yeah.
Where are the lines of reporting? How structured do we make that? Do we just give them a series of collateral templates and platform stuff and go?
That ties into your stuff, doesn't it? Without doubt, I'm saying in terms of the digital environment, the way digital assets and platforms can assist you these days. Because even from the brand guidelines perspective, I know even up until 12 months ago, when you discuss brand guidelines with me, I was thinking about some manual that would be somebody's been to stuff that nobody has seen.
We've seen some really great creative examples of brand guidelines now, where they're hosted online. You can have them behind a login if that's a concern to you, but they're more interactive. You're more likely to get people to use them because they can quickly find the information they need. They can access it on any device they've got. They don't need to worry about that giant PDF's too big to email and it's stuck on the work server.
I think it's about empowering, isn't it? I would always advocate the agency not being involved in every tactical execution, and that might sound like heresy, but it's not. It's about
giving practical.
If you want something practical, you cannot rely on an agency to kind of do everything. You've got to empower the business to feel part of it and to feel it's there. But ultimately, the way you get everyone on board, make it feel like it's theirs.
Yeah. Do you think at this point we've not really gone that much into kind of the platforms you could use to kind of achieve these things? We've touched on Showpad previously. If anybody's unsure of what that is, it's a sales enablement platform which does assist with this kind of thing in terms of the consistency of information, I guess. And
it controls really well messaging and kind of technical stuff, but also not to forget its origin as an asset management platform, so you can keep all the templates on there and store everything centrally. You've got, I don't even know if it's still going, but I've worked with a program called Distribution, which allows people to edit online versions of brochures, of data sheets, and add country or product specific information. So there's multiple ways of doing it.
Yeah.
I suppose it's like anything in this game. It's 90% preparation and 10% execution.
Okay. Do we wrap up with some top tips if we can do that? So I'm going to look at you first, Ollie.
Okay. I think don't let the fact it's going to be complex and hard stop you from trying. Because there's so many things that are complex and hard, and all you have to do is just start it one bit at a time, work out where the problems are, what you need to be doing, and start with one division if you have to. Start at that corporate level slowly if you have to, but don't not begin just because it looks like it's hard.
Sure. John?
I'd say don't let the minority steer the ship.
Okay.
You know, there'll always be naysayers. There'll always be someone who's got that level. Well, we've always done it like this and it seems to work. It's not necessarily the truth.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to be strong enough to bring them with you rather than sort of acknowledge them too much.
Yeah, I think mine echoing Ollie's would be there's never a perfect time to do it. So in the sense of putting things off and waiting won't help, and then probably learning from my own experiences and client interactions would be somebody's got to be bad cop, somebody's got to drive it, somebody's got to be that a little bit more dictatorial around the kind of actual application of these things. So
it's the final say, isn't it? It's that the buck has to stop.
You want an autonomous environment, but somebody's
committees are great, but at some point someone's got to
somebody's got to police it, and somebody's got to actually execute these things as well. So hopefully everybody enjoyed that episode. Feel free to let us know if there's any particular topics you'd like us to cover as part of B2B NAV. As always, don't forget to check out www.b2bknowledge.com, our content hub for helping our clients, prospects and contacts navigate the ever-evolving B2B marketing landscape. Thanks, guys, and see you next week. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.